This is Rick. This isn't about Rick, but Rick is important. Rick runs EVO. It's the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. This isn't about EVO either, but EVO is also important. Most fighting game tournaments are still run by the same folks who ran them during their first iteration. It's a very grassroots and community-centric scene, and tournament organizers rightfully feel a very strong sense of ownership and responsibility when it comes to their respective series. But EVO is not run by its founders anymore. EVO is owned, in part at least, by Sony, and Rick was hired on to captain the ship. But why Rick? Well, Sony is not really the type of company that you think of when you think of grassroots. And Rick can help keep this image intact. And it doesn't hurt that he's also very good at what he does. You see, Rick also runs Combo Breaker, one of the most storied and popular annual fighting game tournaments in the world, and whereas EVO is a spectacle attempting to mimic an actual real-life sports championship, complete with the grandeur and baggage that this entails, Combo Breaker is a celebration of the eccentricities that make the fighting game community as unique as it is. EVO has a necessary sterility to it that it couldn't really function without. It has its own unique personality within the gamut of tournaments, but its size and scope mean it's different from the rest. And while still a large event by its own right, Combo Breaker feels much more like you're in a friend's basement playing video games. But your friend's basement happens to be a huge ballroom, and they invited over a few thousand people. Combo Breaker is the preeminent tournament in the scene for community brackets. These are small brackets run by volunteers and champions of their respective games, alongside the main stage games with the, bigger prize pools. And for some reason, that reason being mostly because Rick is a fan, Monster Rancher 2 is at Combo Breaker 2024. I've talked about player versus player Monster Rancher combat before and how we don't really put a lot of stock into trying to run events like this. Time zones are a big part, but also there's just a whimsy to AI versus AI that most of us really appreciate. You're watching the fighter you train do their own thing. You're a bystander who's done all they can do. But the weird reputation PvP has in the scene is mostly focused around one specific format: max stats. In this format, it's not possible to KO your opponent in one hit, and huge gamble plays are very inefficient, so what ends up happening is both players wait until they have 99 guts and then spend like the whole match attacking with cheap basic techs trying to outchip their opponent. It's fun, but it's also very surgical in its output. So for Combo Breaker, we're not doing max stats. We're running the 3500 stat cap we use in the West, which makes a few significant changes. The most important of which is that monsters are much more fragile. In this format, both risking the whole round on a 30% instant win button and rolling down a slow war of attrition are both viable, and their viability shifts considerably depending on what has previously happened in that match. You see, a Combo Breaker matches will take place in a first to 3 wins format, or best of 5, depending on the verbiage you prefer. They mean the same thing. This means that what happened in earlier rounds will determine how strategies develop and change over time. If your opponent keeps trying to risk it all, maybe you can goad them into it again, and take advantage of that. If your opponent was very risk averse in the last match, maybe you're able to hang tight and wait for a big comeback. Or additionally, if you're super far in the lead, say you've won 2 rounds and your opponent has won 0, you may be able to use your opponent's desperation to your advantage. The variety of choices available is the big differentiator between max stats and 3500. So what's the plan? How do you build a good monster for a format like this? I made a video a million years ago about the basics of competitive play, and a lot of that is still extremely necessary even with PvP, so I'm not going to touch on all those things in detail, but I suppose a quick recap is in order before we continue. Since Combo Breaker is being played on the original PSX version of the game and not on DX, the maximum in any single stat you should aim for is 950. The game makes no distinction between 950 and 999. The only exception to this is your monster's HP, as it's a 1-to-1 measurement with their life stat, so 950 doesn't actually cap there. Your monster's form, i.e. how fat or how skinny they are, gives them bonuses, and penalties to speed and defense. Monster with plus 100 form gains a 25% bonus to defense and a 25% penalty to speed, whereas a monster with minus 100 works for the inverse. This means to max out your speed or defense, you really only need 760 points, plus the bonus from form. For the 3500 stat cap, the most basic stat spread is 950 power or intelligence, 950 skill, 760 speed or defense, and then the rest of your points, which is 840, go into life. You should always make sure your fame is at 100 since this affects your critical hit rate. You can increase fame by winning tournaments or by feeding star prunes. If your monster has 0 or higher for their nature stat, every 10 points in fame gives a 1% boost to your crit rate, meaning at 100 you gain a flat plus 10% crit chance. If your monster has minus 1 or lower nature, they will only gain 1% for every 20 points in fame, maxing out at 5. But additionally, they gain a 1% crit for every 20 points their opponent has as well, gaining an additional 5 for a total of 10. Same with good-natured monsters. So it's complicated, but it doesn't actually end up making much of a difference. But monsters with a nature of -1 or lower also gain 1% crit chance for every 10 points in stress they have. So a monster with a bad nature, max fame, and 100 stress will have plus 20% critical hit chance, which is pretty huge for a few monsters that we'll talk about later. Battle specials are a big one, and despite them being pretty powerful, we're like roughly 30 episodes into the series and we haven't talked about them yet. If your monster is good natured, they'll get the power battle special by default. Power has a chance to proc if you're attacked, and after the damage is dealt, you have approximately 30% or less life remaining. The chance increases with how positive your monster's nature is and how high their loyalty is. This state doubles your damage output with no other effect. Power, like all battle specials, lasts a random amount of time, but it has a chance to stay active much longer than most do. If your monster is bad natured, they'll get anger instead. If your monster is hit with an attack that withers your guts, you have a chance to proc anger. The more withering and the worse your nature, the higher chance to proc. Just like with the weird crit chance formula, the bad nature battle special is significantly more nuanced than the good counterpart. It increases your guts regeneration rate by 50% and doubles the amount of withering you do. This is hugely important for monsters who want to win through attrition. But there's a cost attached to this. Your monster's evasion drastically drops. Your opponent will get a bonus chance to hit equal to if you had done foolery, so be wary. You're basically constantly doing foolery if you've got anger active. Anger is much more difficult to pilot than power, and because you don't control when and where it activates, it can be immediately game losing. Though a perfectly positioned withering attack immediately after anger can sideline your opponent completely while they wait for their guts to rebuild. Anger is the battle special of choice for tanks since they don't care too much about evading attacks, meaning the downside is completely negated, though the general power of tanks in this format is dubious. Because bad-natured monsters get additional crit chance, anger is sometimes hard to avoid if you're banking on crits. If you're a risk-averse player who doesn't want to drop an evasion, the goal is to make sure your monster is neutral-natured, but also that its nature is exactly between -1 and -19. You can do this easily by feeding a bad-natured monster sour jellies and checking the monster vitals page every week until it barely changes to neutral, or through the advanced viewer add-on, which takes all the guesswork out of this process. No other battle special relies on nature quite in the same fashion as power and anger do, but instead the vast majority must be inherited through combining parrot monsters and disc chips in the lab. Grit is the most important battle special in AI vs AI, and while its usefulness is greatly diminished with human control, it's still very powerful. Grit gives your monster a chance to get back up when it's got 1 life after they've been KO'd for the first time. The chance to proc increases the more guts they have when they're KO'd, the higher the monster's loyalty, and the higher their defense stat. Grit gives you more or less at the very worst a chance to mash out 1 more attack on defense, though if your opponent is faster on the draw, the second chance may not matter much at all. Still, get Grit. There's no reason not to. There's never a scenario where you wouldn't want it. Ease is much the same in that it has no downsides and you'd be remiss not to pick it up. Well, it does have downsides, technically, but due to a bug in the original version of the game, they don't really exist. Ease boosts your evasion by a considerable amount and gives you a discount to the guts cost of all your techs. The trade-off is supposed to be that you take double damage while in this state, but this doesn't work properly in the PlayStation version of the game and was only ever fully implemented in the DX re-release that came out in 2021. Ease is set to trigger once your monster has landed or evaded 5 consecutive attacks in any combination. For example, you can land 1 attack, dodge 2 attacks, and then land 2 attacks, as long as it adds up to 5. After doing this, Ease has a chance to proc on every single attack landed and every single dodge with a higher chance the more guts you have banked. It's pretty difficult to trigger, but it really sets you up to snowball any match you're already winning. Fight is a battle special that can be used to punish monsters who try to play defensively and save up all their guts. Fight has a chance to trigger when your opponent hits 99 guts, and if you're hit with an attack in this state, you gain guts equal to the percentage of life you lost from that attack. This is a great way to stay on the offense early and still be able to max out your guts quickly by using your life as a resource. Unfortunately, like all battle specials and everything else in this game, the chance to proc is random. It's another gamble in a litany of dice rolls, so choose your spots to bank on it wisely. Fury is one of the most game-changing battle specials in the game, and it can be used to make insane comebacks. Fury can proc when your monster is hit while your opponent has a battle special active, and on activation your damage and withering become doubled. The higher the damage and withering of the tech your monster is hit with, the higher the chance for it to proc. Fury can only trigger once per battle for each monster and has a very short timer on it, so you're forced to swing quickly to make the most of it. Alternatively, the threat of Fury can be enough to scare your opponent into attacking desperately in an attempt to run out the status, giving you a reprieve to build guts as long as they don't wipe your monster out. Guard is a battle special made to help you get back into a losing game, but it can be difficult to use correctly. If your monster is hit 3 times in a row, they can proc Guard. This gives you a huge boost to your defense and guts regeneration, but it cuts your damage output by half. It's really not advisable to attack while Guard is up, but otherwise it acts as a fairly risk-averse version of Anger that punishes monsters trying to play with only low damage accurate techs. Guard is not universally as good as the other battle specials we talked about so far, but it's still exceptionally strong in specific matchups and game states. Hurry is a comeback special that doubles your critical chance in the last 10 seconds of a match if you're losing. The chance to proc increases the further behind you are. Hurry has an issue in that if the monster with Hurry scores a KO before the time runs out, the battle special doesn't actually go away when you hit rematch. This can happen for other battle specials as well with long activation lengths like Power, but they often will run out before you gain control in the next match. Hurry doesn't though, since its only trigger to end is if the time reaches 0 or if the monster with Hurry is KO'd. You have to quit out of the match and restart to remove the special. I'm going to be enforcing this at Combo Breaker, so keep that in mind. I'm not letting you play an entire round with double critical hit chance. Vigor's an interesting tech in that it's actively detrimental with no upsides in AI battles, but incredibly useful in player control. Vigor simply increases your monster's movement speed to the maximum, and it can stay active for up to half the match, as long as it's not overwritten by any other battle specials. Arena movement speed is largely unimportant in AI vs AI, but little matters more in PvP than being able to control the range you're fighting from. Moving faster than your opponent is the easiest way to facilitate this. If the very first attack swung in a match lands, the monster who uses it can proc Vigor at a % chance equal to the guts cost of the attack. If the attack misses, both monsters are locked out from getting Vigor for the rest of the match. It must be the first attack swung and it must connect. If you have a monster with a fast guts rate and very low committal round opening techs, using a tech on the very first frame of the round is a great way to keep speed control in your favor. Having Vigor active gives your opponent many chances to proc Fury, which is its only real effect in AI vs AI. Will is kind of a crazy battle special in that it's really difficult to use properly, but gives any monster willing to pick their spot for a one-hit KO a much better shot at it than normal. Will gives you a boost to accuracy equal to if your opponent did Foolery. The trade-off is that it doubles the cost of the tech used. This is perfect for ratcheting up the consistency of otherwise inaccurate nuke techs and closing out the match, but like rocking a rhyme that's right on time, it's tricky. First, the massive additional cost is a tremendous burden, and the tech is still not guaranteed to hit, so it's really an all-in strategy. Second, Will can only proc if you're at 99 guts, and the chance of activation increases the longer you're at 99 guts. So it becomes a game of chicken of just not using your resources for a potential chance to score a huge hit. The rest of the battle specials are locked to specific breeds and can't be inherited at all. Reel is an extremely complicated battle special, and it's only available to Joker mains and subbreeds. It gives you a massive boost to your damage, your withering, your defense, your arena movement speed, and your guts regeneration when you get your opponent down to about 30% of their life. You're given a huge statistical advantage to try and finish off your opponent, but if you fail to do so, all of these bonuses get inverted and your monster burns out completely. If your opponent is able to stall out the real timer, you're probably going to get styled on. Unity is a battle special unique to Color Pandora breeds, and it does not work the way it's intended to in the PSX version of the game. On being hit or missing an attack 5 times in a row, think ease but the inverse, your arena movement speed is supposed to max out and your guts regeneration gets a 50% boost. But due to a bug in the original version of the game, it cuts your guts regen in half, meaning this battle special is nearly wholly detrimental, though the arena movement speed is still at least a nice consolation. Drunk is a battle special that only Kato can get, though it's been completely dummied out of the PSX version of the game, so there's not really any point in worrying about it. What it's supposed to do is it sets your arena movement speed to the minimum and cuts your guts regen in half, kinda like Unity, when Kato successfully performs oil drinking. While it's a completely negative effect in DX, I think the idea is that it's supposed to offset the ostensibly good numbers attached to oil drinking, but there's no burden to worry about in the version being played at Combo Breaker, so if you want to see your cat drink a jug of oil, go for it. Got all that? It's a lot of decisions to make, and it's kind of a hassle to get a ton of battle specials on one monster, but they're definitely worth investing in. Once you got some battle specials, you need to think about your tech loadout. Now, this is significantly easier in PvP than in AI vs AI because you can pick and choose what to swing and when to swing it. Regardless of your monster, it's worth picking up a combination of both big nukes and cheap accurate techs. It also helps to get at least one tech in each slot, and even better if you can get both a big tech and an accurate one in each slot as well. Because proper movement is tantamount to victory in PvP, you can greatly boost your chance to win by stopping your opponent from being able to dictate your damage and accuracy if they're able to outmaneuver you. It's also worth taking into consideration how techs move your monster around the arena. This is going to require a little bit of help on your part because I was doing this on stream and it turns out monster movement is very complicated. Depends if you're up against a wall, depends where you are in the arena. But my favorite example of this is Color Pandora's Spiral Rush, which puts you back into slot 4 where it starts on a hit, but moves you all the way to point blank on a miss, where it has much stronger techs. Color Pandora doesn't really want to be swinging Spiral Rush, but it wants to be swinging Giant Whip. It might not be the best use of nearly 30 guts just to move forward, but given the circumstances, getting to swing Giant Whip without needing to worry about being attacked on the long trek to slot 1 can be crucial. The game does have a timer. So which monsters are good and which are Maybe not so good? Which are the biggest gainers over AI battles, and who feels comparatively worse? Over the last few weeks, we did a bunch of testing on stream, so let's go down the list. Ape's power build feels similar to AI vs AI, but its intelligence build seems starkly more powerful. Boomerang and Big Banana are huge options to close out games, and Blast does a ton of work as well. Sneeze on a Miss moves you all the way back into slot 3, which mitigates Ape's awful movement speed. Arrowhead's mostly risk-averse AI build works very well in PvP. Note that the Sacred Combo, Hidden Sting into Colossal, or vice versa, cannot instantly KO from the jump in this format without 2 crits. Acrobatics gets a lot stronger when you can choose when to swing it, so I think Arrowhead is generally stronger even though, he was already really good to begin with. But Bajarl is, legit terrible in PvP. He's not great in AI vs AI, but he also doesn't gain much from being able to pick his spots compared to the rest of the monsters. It's just like a dozen nukes and no other contingency. He's probably the absolute weakest monster we tested. Baku does the exact same thing he does in AI vs AI, which is Diving Press. Not specifically the best monster we tested, but a 1 in 3 chance to instantly win for pretty cheap can't be ignored. His hit techs are a bit weak, but Dust Cloud and 2 Bites are reliable for lower damage options. Beacon has a lot of options, but really didn't perform to the level we expected. It could just be user error on my part, but outside of some stuff in slots 1 and 4, he felt like he was at a total loss for options. The slow arena movement speed doesn't help much either. Centaur is a perennial top tier in AI battles, and I can't imagine it will be much different in PvP. Death Thrust and Triple Stabs are still the go-tos, and normally useless techs like Turn Stab and Rear Leg Kick have serious defined niches to shore up his otherwise very expensive toolkit. And much is the same for Color Pandora. Its standard AI sets are monstrously powerful in the hands of a player, especially with Giant Whip moving you into range for Kamikaze for a quick and powerful 1-2 KO option. Cool movement tech and a strong withering support rounds it out as one of the best monsters that we tested. And just like the previous 2 mons, Dragon is also still a menace. Unbelievably powerful basic techs and a ton of high damage options in every slot make him very difficult to fight against. He can simply swing for game at nearly every opportunity, though he does need to worry about withering. Duckin was always theoretically a really strong monster, but while not great but serviceable in the original and absolute garbage in DX, we never got to see it. In PvP, Duckin relies on very accurate techs that are arguably overpriced but also do a good job of locking down the opponent through high withering. The I-Beam line alone is probably enough to win Combo Breaker, but his anti-tank options can't be discounted either. This is the first time we really get to see Duckin at his true potential. Durahan is maybe the first monster on the list where less really is more. He has a ton of options, but quickly scrolling through them can be detrimental to succeeding at what you want to do. A simple combo of Dash Slash and Million Stabs will do most of the work, while Slash combo is still a necessary slot 1 pickup for the instant kill potential. Charge, Punch combo, and Flash Slash all have uses as well as counterparts for the other techs in their selective slots, but you shouldn't go crazy. Gaboo has great damage potential in Long Punch, which is nice given it's occasionally a liability in AI vs AI. Choosing your spots to swing makes all the difference. Also, his intelligence build seems pretty good, which is always a plus. Gaboo's probably not as good as some of the best monsters, but the relatively cheap combo of multiple long punches gives him a solid niche. Galley seems almost purpose-built to be a PvP monster. His power build has extremely powerful and accurate options in every slot, and his intelligence build, while more position reliant, has one of the absolute best moves in the game for a format like this in Blaze Wall. One of the more functionally unstoppable monsters unless RNG says otherwise, and it often does. Ghost is the first of the low damage timer scam mons that were theorized to have strong lockdown potential in PvP. Ghost's big problem is that outside of the Dove Bomb line, it does literally no damage, so while there's potential to eat 20 plus seconds off the clock spamming energy shot, there's a very real possibility that he will simply not be able to rack up enough damage to make up the deficit. Probably powerful in specific matchups, but I think versus the best monsters in the game, he needs to work a lot harder for any nominal advantage. Golem is exactly as good in PvP as one would expect if they've ever seen him in AI battles. Brow Hit is completely unfair and it wins games entirely on its own. You have access to risky tank buster options in Cyclone and Diving Press, as well as expensive but otherwise risk-averse options that you normally don't see like Fist Missile. Golem can easily win Combo Breaker. Hare has always had a very specific niche in Monster Rancher 2. Up close he's gonna beat your ass, and far away he's mostly trolling. And that's no different in PvP, though with human control he actually does all the thing you'd expect, with the added layer of being able to spam some of the most accurate and low risk withering techs in the game to keep his advantage. Even Plant and Ghost are gambling a little bit when they try to wither, but not Hare, for some reason. Hanger's got great options for winning via death by 1,000 cuts, but because this is Monster Rancher 2, that's like 3 actual cuts, mostly through his basics and Fist Missile. With no accurate options in slot 2 and 3, Hanger will spend a lot of the match stuck jockeying for position in ranges where he has to be risky, but it's not like the techs are bad. Hopper simply does not do damage. Bloody Eye from DX has an insane 6 guts rate, and it's technically illegal to bring that monster over to Combo Breaker, but it doesn't get access to most of its powerful battle specials, so it's a bit of a trade-off. His intelligence techs are his best option should he run into a tank, which is pretty funny, but generally his low damage and need to constantly attack to force a lead like Ghost means his opponents will often have just as many guts as him, despite the 6 guts rate, which, due to guts correction, is a pretty significant disadvantage. Hopper's theoretical lockout ability is mostly weak for the same reasons as Ghost. Jill has one of the absolute best, might as well swing it, techs in the entire game in 2 whips. There's simply not a scenario where this is a bad call, other than, you know, like 1 second left on the clock and your opponent has a 95% life lead. Like, be realistic, like, it's almost always good. Combined with Cube and 3 cubes, Jill has a ton of options in slot 2 alone, which is kind of weird to navigate, but they're all strong. He's got crazy choices on the intelligence side, but their usefulness is hampered pretty severely if your opponent just walks forward. Jill's power and mixed attacker builds in AI vs AI are pretty solid, but PvP is where strictly intelligence-based Jill shines. Great options in slot 1, 3, and 4 to make him hard to pin down and navigate around, though every slot is pretty limited in the role it plays, with slot 1 being accuracy only, slot 3 being damage only, and slot 4 being the big play. Joker is one of the absolute strongest monsters in AI battles, arguably top 4 with no bans, along with Metalner, Kamui, and Naga. But what makes him good is the simple consistency of his basics. They're grossly overtuned and nearly identical, meaning that Joker does the same thing every match with a high degree of uniformity. This is true in PvP as well, but Joker is arguably a little bit weaker here, generally at least, compared to some of the big gainers from Human Control. Simply put, he was already operating at his peak. A player will still play better than the AI, but AI Joker was maybe the closest thing we had to a human player in AI tournaments. Every option was good every time. Joker is still very strong, but I don't think he's nearly as dominant now. Kato's got some pretty good options on both the power and intelligence sides, but his best course of action is probably just the speedrun strat. Build up your guts, swing Twister Claw, and change your game plan according onto if you hit or missed, and repeat. If this is your goal, you can probably run less skill on him in order to crank more points into life, but you kind of go all in on one tech and one slot. Oil drinking is kind of interesting because while it scales with intelligence, the change is minimal and it has an extremely high recovery floor, meaning you can even pick it up on power builds if you're looking for a unique way to lose. Metalner is fully banned at Combo Breaker, but I admit it would be very funny to swing like straight 70 times per round. Maybe next year. Mew gets a lot better when you don't need to worry about its basics, and it was already pretty good to begin with. Scratch is what you'll be swinging most of the time, and occasionally you'll swing the sharp text to cash in on huge crit rates if you have a lot of guts. Its relatively slow guts regen makes everything a bit more of a gamble, but great options on the power side in the first 30 slots, and access to Sing if you feel like being a degenerate make for a very strong monster in player control. Mochi is arguably the worst monster in the game in AI battles, but in PvP, well, he's better. He's not great, but like, he's better. Mochi really just lacks a lot of options. Mochi Ray is great, but what are you going to do if he's not in slot 4? Licking and Pedal Swirl are both awful, though having access to a Drain Tech ostensibly allows you to make comebacks. On the power side, it's basically just Bajarl with some weak and expensive hit techs. For the life of me in testing, I could not figure out a strategy that wasn't just a worse version of something another monster did way better. Being able to wither on every hit is its only real niche. Mach is another consistent low tier, and while player control cannot possibly make him worse, you are explicitly just banking on big nukes to hit. Leaf Cutter is fine, but it doesn't do a ton of damage. If you're lucky, then Mach is the monster for you. You slam Twisters on frame 1 and you pray. Monol's power build is one of the absolute strongest in the AI battle landscape across all formats, but I think its intelligence build is actually the play for player control. Screech is very strong when you can pick your spots for it, as is Soundwave. Ray is great at securing victory when you've got a guts lead, and even stuff like Beam has used as an extremely quick option that gets you back into the game on a miss. You can even pick up Flattening L and X, as they're pretty solid options to run out the clock if you want to. Monol's easily another potential tournament winner. Naga probably should have been fully banned for this format like Metalner was. You can still technically miss every single attack and lose, especially if, you know, you're me, but every Naga tech is a war crime. Naga is the easy favorite to win Combo Breaker. Niton. Oh, my boy Niton. This one's going to be a little bit longer than the others because you know how I feel about Niton. Niton Inc. goes from being one of the absolute most useless techs in AI vs AI to a pretty spooky choice for lockdown and player control. You can even run Anger on Niton pretty easily and risk-free because you can swing Niton Inc. 3 times in a row before you would end up losing more guts than it would wither in Anger. It's not ideal to burn 60 guts trying to wither 70, but it's probably the most potent option for this type of thing in the game. Niton Inc. does no damage even with investment, so it's good on both power and intelligence builds. Intelligence Niton has a good mix of damage and accuracy with high withering across the board, but it has no options in slots 1 and 4, which is pretty detrimental. Power Niton is more of a gambly, big play kind of build with huge options like the shell line and million whips, but ironically it's probably a little bit more consistent despite the low accuracy. Phoenix's power build is the go-to in AI play, and it's arguably still better in PvP than the intelligence one, but its slow walk speed forces Phoenix to really fire off its techs when it gets the chance, since the opponent will be able to navigate around only power techs in slots 1 and 2, or only intelligence techs in slot 3 and 4. It's a good monster otherwise, but it can be kind of spooky to try and pilot. Pixie might be the single biggest gainer in PvP. AI versus AI, she does a lot of nothing. Bad damage and not great accuracy otherwise puts her in a spot where she just simply does not do enough. But in PvP, she goes from one of the absolute worst to one of the absolute best. Her max arena movement speed means she doesn't need to get vigor, and she can easily stop the opponent from getting it simply by firing a single bolt. It's quick, it's cheap, zero commitment, and if it hits you get damage, and if it misses you still get full movement control for the rest of the game, which is good given she has no intelligence options in slot 1. This is her biggest weakness. Bolt, Lightning, and Kiss probably end up being her 3 best techs, with Flame as a backup and Tank Killer in slot 4 to make comebacks. Pixie's a great monster and a legitimate threat in player control, which is just insane to think about. Plant is the most nerfed the monster has been, going from one Monster Rancher game to the next, as it was almost completely unbeatable in PvP in Monster Rancher 1, the strongest a monster has ever been in the franchise. In Monster Rancher 2, it's a solid workhorse monster on the power side. It's decent damage and accuracy with the ability to run the clock after building a lead, and it's much better at this than Ghost and Hopper are. On the intelligence side though, it's kinda belligerent. You can spend the whole match swinging nectars until you're behind and then win late game with the extremely powerful lifesteal. Suezo is another monster with good builds on both the power and intelligence side. Like Mochi, all his techs do a good chunk of withering, but unlike Mochi, the techs are actually good. Suezo has been historically very good in the Japanese max stats format of PvP, and while he's not nearly as dominant in this format, he's got killer options in every slot, meaning it's very hard to find safe footing versus him before you get smoked. Power Tiger can be pretty deflating to play against. A blistering guts rate gives him a ton of chances to hit a clutch stab, and he only needs one. If it doesn't outright one-shot his opponent, Roll Assault and Charge are there to chip it in. Ice Bomb and Blizzard can also turn around a match very quickly for him regardless of how the game was going previously. Though with that said, slots 1 and 2 are pretty bleak for him regardless of build, so he'll have to try and keep his distance. Undine is the best intelligence-based monster in the game, and a contender for best in PvP. Unbelievably powerful and accurate techs with huge withering in slots 2, 3, and 4 means getting up close is a strat to beat her. Or, I mean, in theory at least. But 2 Swords is a cheap tech that pushes her significantly backwards, meaning as long as she's got 14 guts to spare, you're fighting an uphill battle. If your monster has a slow guts rate and you're fighting her, then I wish you the absolute best, because Water Gun is gonna ruin your day. Worm is another monster that has always been theoretically very powerful, but just can't seem to get it together in AI battles. With player control, you get to capitalize on the extremely accurate hit techs and somersault and 3 lashes, and his weirdly reliable nukes and sting throw and pierce throw that tend to land half the time. Worm is easily a top contender for combo breaker. Raki is similar to Pixie in that it has powerful movement control through the ability to fire off a frame 1 air shot, chip damage on connection, and no chance at vigor for the opponent hit or miss. This is especially important for Raki if its goal is to go the intelligence route, because his options get steadily worse the further he moves out from slot 4. On the power side, the extremely accurate kick line does good damage, and sneak attack is absurd at running down the clock once he's built that lead. Despite exceptionally high potential, I think he requires significantly better and consistent decision making than some of his top tier brethren, due to how range dependent he really is. With techs like Tail Lashes, Headbutt, and Knocking Up, Zilla is always going to have a shot at a format like this, but he doesn't have anything as oppressively game-winning as most of the better monsters do. He's got some bizarre clock running potential with Roll Assault too, but it's very difficult for him to build enough guts to do this in a meaningful way. Zilla is like the platonic ideal of a mid-tier. He can win, but he's probably not supposed to. And our final monster is Zoom, and he's similar to Zilla. He's got a ton of cheap and reliable damage options, but nothing jumps out and screams champion. By no means a bad monster, and especially with options like Bite, Tail Lashes, Million Claws, and Claw combo, but he's gonna have to work for it a little bit more. To help consolidate these ideas, here's a graph. The further to the right, the easier they are to use. The further to the top, the higher their maximum potential. If the monster is top right, they most likely have 1 or 2 attacks they can fire off at will and expect to win. If they're closer to the bottom left, things get very murky and they rely on a nebulous series of actions and gambling plays. Most monsters are weak specifically because of how complicated piloting them is, and piloting them is complicated because they do not have strong clear goals. It's a catch-22. The biggest outlier here is probably Bajarl, who's very easy to play but like really not good at anything. So there's all the monsters. But obviously we haven't really talked about mixed breeds or build options yet. Generally speaking, you'll want the monster with the fastest guts regeneration you can find, as this means you'll get more chances to attack. But guts correction as a concept begins to matter more in PvP than in AI battles because you have exact control over the buttons you press. Guts correction is a concept that refers to two ideas. The first is that the more guts you have saved up compared to your opponent, the more damage you do, the less damage you take, and additionally you get bonuses to hit percent and dodge percent. If you have 99 guts and your opponent has 30, you're going to feel much more powerful than usual. And the second idea is that these bonuses scale inversely with how good your guts regeneration is. A purebred dragon who has a 19 guts rate at 99 guts is significantly stronger than Gidris, the Metal Nurse subbreed. So this becomes something you must consider when choosing not only your main breed, but also your subbreed. Do you value resource generation, or do you value bigger attacks with fewer chances to swing? It's also very valuable to take this into consideration on a matchup by matchup basis. Nighton with Anger can wither 70 guts or more with Nighton Ink. Versus a slow guts rate monster, this means that the onus is on them to try and attack first and get some damage on the board before they get locked out entirely. The downside to this is that slower guts rate monsters become much stronger the longer they chill with guts in the bank. It's not an obvious decision one way or the other, and using your monster's strengths to their full potential is going to be tricky, though I personally tend to favor having higher resource generation even at the cost of decreased offenses and defenses. The last thing to talk about is tech order. Maybe not the most important thing in every scenario, but your techs retain the order and layout of whatever you had them set to during the last tournament you entered in-game. In AI battles, this is really important for techs you want to use on the first frame of the round, but as the timer ticks down, the order becomes more meaningless because, they just randomly change stuff. In PvP, much is the same, and having tech orders are really only something to focus on if you're trying to fire off an attack instantaneously and don't want to have to menu for it. It's up to you whether this is something you want to stress about or not, but it does have obvious implications. And I think that's it. I mean, not really. There's a lot you need to know about Monster Rancher still, but all that's been covered in other videos I've done, and I am assuming if you're watching this is because you already know how to play Monster Rancher, but you're not aware of the nuances in player control. So consider this an appendix to other videos I've made about competitive Monster Rancher. I want to give a big shout out to all my supporters for sticking with me through this period of fewer videos. I know the DQM video and then all the combo breaker stuff, it's been a little bit slow, but I really appreciate it. I still can't believe Monster Rancher's a combo breaker, man. Like, what an insane thing to be part of. I can't wait to meet everyone and show off our little game, and I hope to see lots of you there, even if you're not going for Monster Rancher. I know a lot of people in the community are into fighting games. I know a lot of people who watch my videos don't actually give a shit about Monster Rancher. They just like the videos. And, I have a fighting game background as well. But yeah, thank you guys. This was pretty fun to throw together, and I really enjoyed testing. See y'all in Chicago.